Tony Montalto sat in a Florida courtroom and watched in disbelief as the assassin of his 14-year-old daughter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, as the jury was unable to reach unanimity regarding the death penalty. Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we'll be looking at school shooters reacting to death sentences. Yeah, you heard it right. 6 months ago, Montalto said of the decision, "It was the third worst thing that's ever happened to me." He stated that the first thing was discovering that his daughter Gina was among the 17 people killed in the 2018 mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. The second was seeing her physical form. He told CNN that the shooter's sentence was the latest in a series of failures by the school system and law enforcement, who did not prevent the shooting despite numerous red flags, leaving Gina unprotected. Thereafter, our hope for justice through our legal system was dashed. It failed to discipline a ruthless, cruel, and heinous killer to the full extent of the law. Governor Ron DeSantis is expected to sign into law legislation changing the requirement that a Florida jury must be unanimous to recommend the death sentence, reducing the number of jurors required from 12 to 8, the lowest threshold of any state that still practices capital punishment. The legislation sponsors framed it as an effort to reduce the influence of activist jurors who, according to critics, lie during jury selection about their willingness to contemplate the death penalty. The measure maintains the requirement that a jury must reach a unanimous verdict of guilt, and Florida judges will still be permitted to reject a death recommendation and impose a life sentence instead. Some, however, are opposed, fearing that the new law is a constitutionally dubious response to a particular case that could result in more death sentences. CNN quoted Maria DeLiberato, executive director of Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, as saying, "While the Parkland tragedy is unfathomable, we cannot and should not base significant legislative decisions on a single case." For Montalto, whose wonderful, bright, and bubbly daughter was brutally murdered, a straight-A student, Girl Scout, and member of her church's youth group, the new law is not about sending more individuals to death row. It is about assuring that victims are treated fairly in a system that already affords protections to convicted murderers. "We cannot just look at the perpetrators and the effects of this law on them," said Montalto, who testified in favor of the measures before state House and Senate committees. "We must consider the victims and the impact of this law on their chances of receiving justice. If the system could stop Gina, but it couldn't stop this killer, then the system had to change," he said, emphasizing that he was speaking only for himself and not on behalf of other Parkland families. "We are aware that it will not affect the Parkland shooter, nor will it affect my family, but why should future generations endure as we have?" Parkland jury's 9-3 vote ended with life in prison. Nearly all 27 states with the death penalty require a unanimous jury to recommend or impose the death penalty on a capital offender. Currently, Alabama is the only state where a judge can impose the death penalty if 10 or 12 jurors recommend it. In the past, as few as 7 jurors were required to recommend the death penalty in Florida, but that has changed in recent years due to a succession of court decisions. Nonetheless, Florida's capital sentencing procedure is still complex, necessitating multiple unanimous findings. After the Parkland shooter pleaded guilty to 17 counts of murder and 17 counts of attempted murder, the court examined the offense and the defendant's background to determine whether the death penalty was an appropriate punishment. Prosecutors argue that aggravating factors existed, arguing that the shooting was particularly heinous, callous, and premeditated, citing the gunman's meticulous planning and statements expressing his desire to commit mass murder. The murderer's public defenders, meanwhile, presented 41 potential mitigating circumstances, justifications for sparing his life. Among them were claims that he had been exposed to alcohol and narcotics in utero and suffered from a neurodevelopmental disorder and intellectual deficits. The jurors unanimously agreed with the prosecutor's assessment of aggravating circumstances, the initial requirement for a death sentence rendering the defendant eligible for execution. However, they weren't able to concur unanimously that aggravating circumstances outweighed mitigating ones. The jury foreman told CNN affiliate WFOR that one juror was a hard no because of the killer's history of mental illness. 2 others agreed, resulting in a 9-3 consensus for the death penalty. That meant a sentence of life without parole, which the judge was required by law to impose. The opportunity of justice. When asked about criticisms of legislation, Montalto emphasized that the objective is not to increase the number of death sentences, He stated the trials must be equitable and that not every convicted murderer deserves to be executed. This measure protects the rights of victims. We wish to have faith in our judicial system. Our justice system cannot be stopped by a single person. We require consensus, collaboration, and deliberation, and this was thwarted by a single juror in our case," he said, referring to the juror who was a firm no. Additionally, Montalto emphasized that capital defendants continue to enjoy ample protection. This entails a unanimous verdict of conviction and, in Florida, an automatic appeal to the Florida Supreme Court for death sentences. Even if the conviction and sentence are upheld, many capital cases are subject to years of appeals in state and federal courts, often all the way to the US Supreme Court, before the execution of the defendant. So that's all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and ring that bell icon so that you never miss our upcoming videos. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section down below. Stay tuned, and we'll catch you in the next video.